Hello, everyone. Today we are going to analyze the morality of the capital punishment. Our central question is what notion of justice is used to defend capital punishment? Does capital punishment deters crime? Does capital punishment have a brutalizing effect on society? And would life in prison have the same effect in society as the capital punishment? The debate that society holds is what is the morality? So we have clear sides that are uh, defending that this is either brutal and not quite current way to execute people that have committed crimes, and on the other side, there's people who are expecting to have are associating the notion of capital punishment with a notion of justice that is only natural and logical. So we are going to analyze specific points that can be showing us and shed light on what is the morality and what moral status can we give to punishment like the capital punishment. So what are the reasons behind the idea of the death penalty? Uh, in society, there are these notions that are connected with the practice, the notion of closure for the families, how families can have closure after seeing the end of the life of the person who took them, stripped them from one of their relatives or their loved ones, and that is the expectation from them. The Another idea is the idea of retributism or the idea of desert. Mainly, this idea considers that regardless of the possible societal consequences that we have, these people deserve a punishment because there is a connection between the action, the negative action, the morally reprehensible action that they have taken, and some sort of natural, logical application of justice. And the idea of retributism defends that this punishment has to be proportional. So if they took a life, the only natural, just, logical consequence for this is to take their lives as well. There is a more consequentialist notion in the idea of safety and the idea that weeding out people that have committed crimes or that are naturally likely to do something like this is going to end up in having a more just and safer society. And the final one is also a consequentialist idea, which is the notion of deterrence. And we are going to see this an analysis of this with the arguments of Louis Pochmann, saying that it is only natural that people want to live. So if we threat people to be killed if they kill another person, then that is going to have deterrent. They are going to be discouraged to do something like this. The case study that we are going to see, and of course, this is the one that problematizes some of the aspects that we have seen in the justification of the moral of the capital punishment. And the case is the case of Karla Faye Tucker, who in the 80s was also known as the pickaxe murderess. She was she was the first woman in the United States to be executed since the Civil War. She was executed in 1984 by lethal injection after 14 years on death row. Um, and the entire case was widely publicized. You can see in the corner a picture of an interview that Larry King did to her. The point is that the murder that she committed was associated with some was in the middle of some gruesome situation. So she was with a group of people that broke into a house to steal money for drugs. The things went bad. One person died. There was another person. They realized that in the same place where they were, there was a person covered under the sheets of a bed, and then she killed that person with a pickaxe. She was sentenced to death, And after she was sentenced to death, it was said that she was reborn in Christ, that religion had turned her life around, that she was an entirely different person. It was also known that her childhood was a very difficult childhood, that she was prostituted for to get money for drugs. At age 14 or 15, she was very young when she started this path. That she was abused and neglected when she was growing up, and these are like additional elements that are making this decision less obvious. So uh, even if people can turn their lives around and be totally different people, is that an element that is worth to be considered and analyzed when we are seeing the issues of capital punishment? Also, I think that there is an important question that we have to pose, and it is if we can think that evil people are there. There's some sort of natural evil in people, like there's some sort of inherent or intrinsic spirit of evil in people, and in that case, we would say that there's no other way than executing them and getting rid of them. But these comes with a broader discussion about the prison system, and the question that could be posed here is: do you think that the prison system is designed to rehabilitate and make people better, or make people reflect on the things that they have done? And I have been trying to find statistics around this, but I would like to know from the people that have been sentenced to death, how many of them have been in prison before? So is the prison system trying to make people reflect and be better and be back to society in a way that can be functional and safe for the rest of society? Or are we just in this system in which we put people in prison to make them worse so they go out to the streets and do worse things, and systematically we engage in this cycle that ends up with us being obligated to kill them to preserve a safe society? Some background of the notion of capital punishment. Basic concepts: abolitionists, the ones who wants the idea of the people who wants to abolish capital punishment. Retentionists, the ones who want to retain, who wants capital punishment to stay in place. And punishment, the deliberate and authorized causing of pain or harm to someone thought to have broken the law. Capital punishment is a punishment by execution of someone officially judged to have committed a serious or capital crime. Retributism, the view that offenders deserve to be punished or pay back for crimes and to be punished in proportion to the severity of their offenses. And this idea of retributism is going to be interesting for some of the cases that we are going to see. So, if we are talking about proportionality, what should be what crimes should be proportional to the death penalty, if any? There are mainly these two views of punishment. The sole reason we should punish the wrongdoer is because they deserve to be punished. This desert is the only justification required. They did something wrong, no matter what happens, no matter the context, the consequences. They did something wrong, they deserve to be punished. And the other one is the only proper justification is the good consequences for society. You can see how this moves towards a more consequentialist rationality, that the punishment of offenders will bring, most notably, the prevention of future crimes and the maintenance of an orderly society. Currently, it's punishable by killing when people are found guilty of first degree murder, which is killing with premeditation or while performing a major crime or felony, or something involving particularly egregious circumstances, such as the death of several people, the death of a child, the death of a police officer. These are the ones that can be considered first degree murders and can be punished with the death penalty. In Which is the only one. Now, second degree murder, which is killing without premeditation but with some degree of intent, is not punishable by death. And even less manslaughter, which is killing without premeditation or intent, as when one person kills another in the heat of passion, or when they are just blacked out, or drunk, or high, and they just cannot be seen as responsible for their actions. Some background of the capital punishment throughout the world. The countries in green have no executions. The countries in orange have the capital punishment, but they have not used it in 10 years. The countries in yellow have an exceptional use of the capital punishment, and countries in red have widespread use of the punishment. And I think it's a very interesting group in the world for the US to be part of. Most execution took place in China, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the USA in that order. At least 1,634 people were executed in 25 countries in 2015. This represents a stark increase in the number of executions recorded in 2014, more than 50% increase. In 2014, Amnesty International recorded 1,061 executions in 22 countries. So this is the highest number of executions for 2015. It was the highest number recorded in more than 25 years. So this is definitely, and this is the voice that Amnesty International are trying to raise in terms of the severity and the widespread use of capital punishment, and also to reflect on what are the political and the ideological ideas that are connected with these practices, especially with the countries that are being taken into account. And this idea, I think that one of the most interesting things about capital punishment is how people are sometimes they are thirsty for an idea of justice and revenge, and they say, you know what, we should just expedite the process and try to make these processes significantly expensive. It is known that it is more expensive to go through the process of sentence and execution of the capital punishment than the amount of money that it takes to have a prisoner in live in prison. And of course, this sounds contra. It doesn't sound logical, but it is known that most of the cost is lies in the court costs and several procedures that have to take place for a person to be executed. So some retentionists and some detractors of some of these processes are saying, well, this is way too expensive. We should make this faster and easier so justice can be served. But the restrictions that are taken in place go back to to a couple cases in the 1960s, which are the first one being Furman versus Georgia. Mr. Furman was burglarized in a private home when a family member discovered him. Part of the report and what Mr. Furman said was that he was trying to flee, and in doing so, he tripped and fell. There was some sort of confusion, so he accidentally activated, or the gun that he was using activated, went off and killed the resident of the home. He was convicted for murder and sentenced to death. Of course, this was killing a person while committing a felony, which is first-degree murder. In the same along the same years, Elmer Branch, an African American, was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1969. The judgment of conviction with punishment assessed at death violates the Fifth 8th and the 14th Amendments of the Constitution of the United States and poses the question of whether capital punishment inflicted as a punishment for a crime less than murder constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. Additionally, there were questions about the jury. So the case of Elmer Branch was different because this was not a murder case. This was a case in which a senior citizen, female senior citizen, was raped in her house, or there was attempt of rape. Then the person that was trying to rape her escaped. She called the police and she described the person that was involved in that. She said that there was an African American person with jeans and sneakers or something like that. And then they found Elmer Branch. They did some forensic investigation, and there were proof that it was actually him. After this, he was sentenced to death, and it was found out with the entire case of Foreman versus Georgia and Branch versus Texas how the capital punishment had been applied in kind of a capricious way. It was clear that Foreman was guilty, but his defense was raising questions about the justice of capital punishment, how it was not kind of a standard procedure in every state. It seems that every state and every judge had the freedom to apply this punishment in the way that anyone saw fit, and it was definitely raising questions about how just and how fair was capital punishment. In 1967, a national moratorium after Mr. Furman was sentenced to the capital punishment. He appealed, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court considered that it was actually that the application of the capital punishment was too severe, and that there was not a systematic procedure and a unified procedure to apply these cases. So in 1967, there was a national moratorium on capital punishment while the U.S. Supreme Court considered its constitutionality. In 1972, it appeared that the court had put an end to the death penalty with this case, declaring certain capital punishment laws to be unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual because juries were applying them arbitrarily and capriciously. It seems that if Furman would mark the passing into history of capital punishment in the United States. So to resolve these issues, some states actually tried to build a more complex appeal process that would guarantee the rights of death row inmates. Capital trials are much more expensive to carry out than their known capital counterparts because of the price at stake the life is of the accused. So several states tried to reform, and several of those actually succeeded in developing a more systematic process for this. So in 1967, Georgia, Florida, and Texas has drafted new death penalty laws. However, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld them. 2 of the 9 justices, only 2, William Brennan and Thurgood Marshall, persisted in the belief that capital punishment is unconstitutional per se. It had survived, and also the controversy surrounding it. So these 3 states managed to build laws that would defend the practice. And it's interesting because after the moratorium in the 70s, several states actually did not try to build new laws, but they just ruled out this practice from the laws. Currently, only 30 states apply the capital punishment. I think the last one was Arkansas, who finished. They were the ones who finished that practice in 2015. Some moral theories and how some views about how moral theories would see the practice of capital punishment. Some retentionist views from a utilitarian perspective would say that death penalty achieves overall utility through prevention, preventing the criminals from striking again. The death penalty can achieve overall utility through deterrence, the dissuading of possible offenders from committing capital crimes. Some abolitionist responses would say that the evidence for capital punishment prevention of deterrence effect is very weak. Even if the death penalty is a more severe punishment than life in prison, it does not follow that the death penalty deters murderers better. Numbers are not are not supporting the idea that in those states that there is capital punishment, people are deterred to commit this crime. There is no strong evidence to support this idea. But regardless of the statistic, Louis Pachman presents this common sense case for deterrence. It is obvious that most people want to avoid jail and that long sentences will deter most potential criminals better than short ones, and that there are good reasons to believe that the death penalty deters better still. Ernest van der Haag presents also this retentionist argument, saying that if we use the death penalty, we risk killing convicted murderers and saving innocent lives. That is kind of a factual statement. But if we abolish the death penalty, we risk bringing about the deaths of innocent victims and saving the lives of murderers. So we might have the possibility to kill innocent people in the death row, but if we abolish the death penalty, we risk the possibility to let criminals go out to the streets, and in that case, we would be risking the lives of innocent people. If we must risk something, it is better to risk the life of convicted murderers than those of innocent people. Thus, our best option is to retain the death penalty. I think that this utilitarian idea is highly questionable, basically because it is an idea that is based on fundamental intrinsic considerations on the nature of people. So it is assuming that people are naturally innocent or evil, and then we have to weed out the bad ones to keep the good ones. So it seems kind of a polarizing idea that I'm not sure if we are able to defend on moral terms. The response to van der Haag's argument is that the retention fails to take into account the possibility that the death penalty could encourage violent crime instead of just deterring it. Violent criminals who know that they are likely to get the death penalty may commit murder to avoid being captured. Capital punishment has a brutalizing effect on society. So some other crimes, and in the case of people who commit crimes while in the commission of a felony, for them not to be caught, they might decide to kill the victim. So these extreme measures might have a brutalizing effect on society. An abolitionist view from utilitarian terms would say that more net happiness is created in society by sentencing murderers to life in prison without parole than by executing them. The death penalty is too costly and might not have the intended effects. From a non-consequentialist view, abolitionists would say that everyone has the right to live, even hardened criminals. And to the death penalty is a violation of that right. Retentionist response: people do indeed have a right to live, but this right is not absolute. Abolitionists would say that our penal system is inherently unjust, sometimes executing innocent people, and the retentionist response is that injustice does not stem from the intrinsic nature of the institution of capital punishment. It results from the administration of the death penalty. So they are trying to justify that the capital punishment is inherently good, but it is a problem of administration that we need to try to make this better applied, and not that the punishment is inherently wrong. Retentionists would say that offenders should be punished because they deserve to be punished. Punishment is a matter of justice, not social utility or consequence. Capital punishment for the crime of murder shows respect for persons, and this is an argument that is being defended by Immanuel Kant as an individual, not necessarily from an application of his moral theories, he would say that applying capital punishment, killing the murderer, is a recognition of the human nature of the victim. So if we don't kill, if we don't punish the murderer, it might seem as if the person that was killed was not worth of justice. The abolitionist response is that the penal retribution is not justice, it is just revenge. So on these lines, I think that we could establish two possible sides. First, the morality of capital punishment in terms of possible mistakes in its application, one. And the second one is, let's assume that we develop some sort of technological tool in which we have absolute certainty of the if the person that is being sentenced is guilty. Let's say that we have no doubt. Even if we have no doubt, is it morally correct to kill a person just because they are, or because, maybe not just because they are guilty of killing a person? Is this something that can be morally defended? Some moral arguments, and as you saw in the reading, this is particularly focused on how the capital punishment might be applied more to African American populations than non-African American populations. If the death penalty discriminates against blacks, it is unjust. If the death penalty is unjust, it should be abolished. The death penalty actually discriminates against blacks, so therefore it should be abolished. And of course, if you've been analytical about these things, you see that the heart of the argument is in premise 3. The death penalty discriminates against blacks. Is it actually true? The support for premise 3 must come in the form of solid statistical data that is carefully interpreted. Anecdotal evidence, for example, news stories, touching cases, some of these things are not something that is solid for our moral analysis. In the premise 1, if the death penalty discriminates against blacks, is it unjust? Is that true? At first glance, it might seem acceptable to both retentionists and abolitionists, but abolitionists interpret that if the administration of the death penalty is biased against blacks, then the death penalty itself isn't just. So there might be, and of course there are also different sides to be taken into account here. One thing is if this is particularly applied against blacks because they are predominantly the ones that are guilty or the ones that are being involved in crime. And the second one, which is a different topic, a different argument, is if it is if it is unproportionally be applied to blacks because there is some sort of societal bias, and that is another topic that might raise concerns. Retentionists replied that the unjust administration of a punishment does not entail the injustice of the punishment itself. So maybe we should reform, or we should eliminate the bias, or we should eliminate the processes, which is pretty much what was done after the moratorium in the 70s. They were trying to build this system that would guarantee that there is less bias in the sentencing. So if we eliminate the bias, if we make this administratively something very solid, is it still morally correct to sentence a person to die? No inconsistency. Retentionists say that they can agree that the administration of the death penalty discriminates against blacks and that this biased treatment is unjust, and still consistently believe that executing murderers is morally permissible. Now, there are some statistics about rates of defendants executed in the U.S. in the 1976. So you can see in the graph how 34.5% of the people that have been executed are black, 8.3 are Latino, 55.6% are white, and other races are 1%. However, the death row population by race are 41% black, 13% Latino, 42% white, and 2% other races. In the case, and of course, these clashes with the population, with numbers of the population. Specifically in North Carolina, 80% of the death row population are black, 62%, 62 in number, I'm sorry. This is not percentage, but numbers. 80 are black, 62 are white, 5 are Hispanic, Native Americans are 7, and Asians are just 1, for a total of 155 people. We see how there is a higher number of African American people in the death row. These against the breakdown of the population. I think it's shocking if you think back to our topic on affirmative action, how this breakdown of the population would show that in that topic there is a disproportionate amount of people that are accessing the University of North Carolina and accessing higher education, because it was not the 22% of the population. It was not reflecting the population because it was too short. Now, in this case, we have a higher population. It is also disproportion, but it is disproportion on the side of being too much representation of the African American population in the death row population. I think that if there's anything that we need to analyze in this case, is specifically how the morality of this is a complex issue. It's a complex topic. Of course, a biased system is immoral. It is biased to have. It is immoral to have a bias that serves to kill a group of people. But it is not the entire discussion. Even if it is unbiased, even if the system is rock solid, even if we are not going to make any mistake, is it still something that is morally correct? Other questions like the possibilities of rehabilitation or some social disadvantages, specifically in the case of Karla Faye Tucker. This is a girl who grew up in a background that did not allow her to grow in a good possibility. Like she was facing hardships that other people might not be facing. And what if these people actually have the possibility to turn their lives around? Aren't they some factors that should contribute to analyze the morality of the capital punishment? Also seen in the international arena, it is seen that the US is part of the very select group that is still promoting this. Some of these issues and some of these caveats that need to be seen on this topic, I want to hear your comments. Of course, now this distance learning is making me just talk, and I would like to hear you as I used to hear you in the classroom. So I would like to know if you think that the death penalty should be abolished in the state of North Carolina, and for what reasons? What do you think that from this moral background should be particularly applicable to the state of North Carolina? I'm looking forward to hear your comments, and please stay safe.